alaikum, good evening, morning to all our global community and of course our Read community in Pakistan. Welcome to our second day of collaborative event of Read Pakistan and International Institute of Humanology. Human Evolution Through Books. Through this event, we are introducing Science of Humanology to Read community. I would be the moderator of today with my co-moderator, Jessica J. Lockhart. By profession, I'm a mechanical engineer and social entrepreneur. I joined Read Pakistan in 2018 and founded Read Pakistan Case Chapter with some of my co-founders, worked 5 years as Event and Information Secretary, and now recently appointed as Vice President of International Chapters to launch Read Pakistan globally. And this collaborative event would be an icebreaker to connect the international community with Read Pakistan, followed by a series of events. Yesterday, our theme was Discovery and Understanding. And we invited well-known experienced humanologists to talk about the theme. Today, our theme is Growth and Change. But before I share the highlights of yesterday's discussion and today's agenda, let me introduce the brief profile of both the organizations. Read Pakistan was founded in 2012 to promote reading culture. The founder of the organization is Assistant Attorney General of Pakistan, Mr. Farokh Dao, and co-founder, Ms. Sayyida Fatima Gilani. Both individuals are committed to encourage reading habits, particularly in both youth and the students. The vision and mission of the Read Pakistan is to empowering minds through reading, developing knowledge-based society through power of books and reading. Read Pakistan has launched history's largest campaign to establish 100,000 libraries in Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, all human beings have their own persona, feelings, emotions, and way of living. And humanology is the science of understanding human nature. Humanology helps human beings change their lives by empowering them personally and professionally. The International Institute of Humanology develops and supports this new discipline to study and explain human beings. It was founded by Jessica J. Lockhart in 2013. She is also an internationally renowned prize-winning speaker and author. Recently joined Read Pakistan family as Read Ambassador from Panama. As I mentioned in the beginning that yesterday we had comprehensive discussion with our humanologists related to discovery and understanding of humanology. We had James Soule, Alexandra, and Jessica J. Lockhart. James Soule mentioned the basic of humanology, that it helps us to understand our personality in a more deeper way, like what we want exactly from our lives. And this enables us to improve our personal and professional relationships. Alexandra highlighted optimism coaching through her knowledgeable presentation, and in optimism coaching, humanologists analyze human beings' body, soul, feelings, and emotions by listening to them empathetically and then guide them to overcome the root causes of every problem. Jessica J. Lockhart mentioned that every human being has 4 basic elements: personal essence, beliefs, worldly view, and personal sphere. If we will work on these 4 elements keenly, then we will be able to manage our life easily. She also highlighted different tools and techniques used in humanology, for example, absolute forgiveness. Later, we had a panel discussion with our panelists, and the main extract of the discussion was that humanology is serving the world in a way to make a better place for everyone. Optimistic approach and absolute forgiveness are the key tools to being alive and energized during our difficult times. Jessica also shared some books related to humanology for our reading, including some journals and articles, because reading is the biggest tool which helps us to change our mood and perspective. Today, we have invited well-known authors who have written multiple books on human and social issues. And Jessica is going to introduce today's amazing guests. Yes, Jessica.
Okay, it is with great pleasure and great happiness that I'm here today sharing this time of knowledge, this time of knowledge, information, books, humanology, and much more. As you know, the Institute of Humanology is devoted to helping human beings know and understand themselves so they can take action. And books are a fundamental tool in that endeavor. Today, we have 4 fantastic authors joining us from different places in the world. Well, today we happen to have a few from the United States, but we usually have people from all around the world, as you know. And I will be very, very happy to introduce each of them as they take the floor. Sorry. Today, the first speaker is going to be Jennifer Klein. She's connecting from the US. Then we'll have the pleasure to also listen to Liliana Tinoco Bäckert, all the way from Switzerland, although she is Brazilian in origin. Then we'll move on to Darren Fink from the US, followed by Dr. Paul, let's see if I can pronounce it properly, Hokemeyer from the US as well. They will each give us their own unique perspective on human evolution through books. And we will be introducing them as we start the show. It's all back to you, Javeria.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Okay, so as Jessica mentioned, our first speaker is Jennifer Klein. And I am going to share her profound profile with you guys.
Okay, so let me now tell you who she is.
Yes, you can see my screen.
Yes, okay. Perfectly. Thank you. Thank you so
much. She has amazing profile, a product of experiential project-based education herself, Jennifer Klein. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Jennifer Klein, right?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. She taught college and high school English and Spanish for 19 years. In 2010, Jennifer left teaching to begin principal learning strategies, which provide professional development to support authentic, student-driven global learning experiences in school. She has a broad background in global education and partnership development, student-driven curricular strategies, inclusivity, and experiential inquiry-driven learning. As a former head of school with extensive international experience, Jennifer facilitates dynamic, interactive workshops to provide the tools for high-quality project-based learning in all cultural and socio-economic contexts. Jennifer is also committed to intersecting global project-based learning with culturally responsive and anti-racist teaching practices, and her experience includes deep work with schools seeking to address equality, take on brave conversations, build healthier community, and improve identity politics on campus. Jennifer's first book, The Global Education Guidebook, was published in 2017, and her second is scheduled for publication in 2022 with co-author Kepono Seoti. And as educational leader, writer, speaker, and bilingual workshop facilitator, Jennifer strives to inspire educators to shift their practices in school worldwide. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Well, I believe I should be able to share my screen, correct? I'm hoping. Here we go. All right. Are you now able to see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for the introduction. And it's important to clarify too that one of the things I bring to the table today is that I am a former English teacher as well. So I spent 19 years in the classroom, predominantly high school English, a little Spanish now and then when that was what people needed from me, but most of the time English. And so a lot of what I'm going to speak to today comes from the classroom experience as much as from my experience as an author, and now my experience really helping to transform the way that teachers teach inside the classroom, all of which I believe starts and ends with the kinds of experiences of reading that give them a deep, deep perspective from somebody other than themselves, right, and allow them to enter the world of someone else. So this is just a great frame from my perspective. This is used in a lot of literature classes around the world, this idea of windows, sliding glass doors, and mirrors. So it begins with Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who wrote that books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. I want to stop right there and just break that down a little bit, right? That we can use books as a way to see into the lives of others, right? And anytime we have an opportunity to read a book that allows us to sort of step into someone's life and learn from it, Dr. Sims Bishop would describe that as a window. But he goes on to say, too, that these windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created and recreated by the author. This is true when it comes to nonfiction, right? It's true when it comes to fiction. It's true when it comes to fantasy, right? That a really good book allows us to walk through sliding glass doors and to truly feel like we are there with the characters experiencing what they are experiencing. Some of the best poetry in the world does the same. It allows us to feel what the writer has felt and therefore to see the world in a different way. And then the last point that he makes is when lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. And I think that's really, for me, that's one of the most important pieces of literature. Not just how do I learn about others, but actually how do books allow me to understand myself, right? Whether we're talking about in the classroom or outside the classroom, at any point in our development as human beings, that opportunity to really see a mirror looking back at us when we read a book. This is actually one of the biggest challenges too that I think we have in education in many parts of the world, is finding literature that will serve as a mirror for all students, right? If we believe that part of the goal is equity, if I'm teaching in a diverse classroom, but all of my authors are white Americans, then I'm not going to be able to set up mirrors for all of my students, right? In order to truly ensure that every student finds moments when they can see themselves and their own experience reflected back, my choices have to be diverse as well. So from my perspective, both as an educator and as somebody who works with teachers, I think really, really good reading starts with understanding that sweet spot where we bring together authenticity, complexity, and relevance. The two pieces that I think, when we're thinking about the classroom experience in particular, I think that the two pieces that the teachers can control the most is whether our choices are complex, meaning that they are at the right level of complexity to challenge our children, our students, and whether they are authentic, meaning that they come from true sources. And I'll give you guys an example of the problem embedded in this point. I had a student many, many years ago give me a wonderful short story collection, and it was all stories of young people in the Middle East, right? And I received this gift with great appreciation, and I brought it home. I was very particularly interested in and exploring authors from the Middle East. But when I opened this book, I discovered that every single author, or every single story, pardon me, was written by a woman from Chicago who had absolutely no Arabic descent at all, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that she doesn't know how to capture someone else's story, but there's a lack of authenticity there that's important for us to consider, right? That I think we learn more when we are hearing from someone who is from that experience, from that culture, from that place and time, right? That creates even more authenticity. And then the relevance piece, of course, has to do with the students, right? With the person who's doing the reading. We've found through research very clearly that when students feel that the book is relevant to their own lives, their reading comprehension increases significantly, right? So it's really important that we not just think about relevance in terms of what we're trying to teach kids, but we really think about who these kids are and what would be relevant and meaningful for them. As a global educator and the author of a book on global education, I want to also think a little bit about this idea of passports to the world, right? The way that a book or a short story or a poem can transport us to someplace else. And I wanted to share this image that I've been creating over the last couple of years with the help of teachers I've worked with, to try to help us understand the way that we have this opportunity, whether we're talking about the classroom or parents or adults in their continued learning, to imagine the world as concentric circles of community, right? We often think of our community as being those smallest circles down at the bottom, right? The family, the school, and our city or town, maybe including our province or our state. But I want to really invite us to think about the kind of growth I believe personally that humans need right now, which is an expansive understanding of community, meaning it's not enough for me just to care about what's happening to my neighbor down the block. It matters to me to understand what Jessica is experiencing where she is, and where Javeria, I'm sorry, I'm going to totally Spanish the pronunciation of your name. I apologize. Too many years in Latin America. And what she is experiencing in her context, right? And this idea of almost seeing this image as an accordion, right? Where students are zeroing in on what's close and expanding out to what's farther and zeroing back in on what's close, right? Particularly young people need to stay close to home. It's concrete for them when they think of community as being right here in my classroom or right here in my home. But as they grow up, we want to make sure that they expand their ideas about community. And I believe that novels, poetry, short stories, really beautiful plays can really help us to do that. I do want to point out that I think that there are certain challenges or pitfalls that can come up in this work very consistently. And the work that I've been doing as a global educator and the book that I wrote is all about making sure that these relationships we develop with the world are humanizing in their basic essence. And what I mean by that is that we're not reading books that would make us feel sorry for others, and that we're not coming from a place of, oh, I want to be able to save this community that I don't live in, right? We don't need more saviors. What we need are people understanding each other, right? And so I pulled out this quotation in particular because I think it captures it nicely, that giving students the opportunity to engage directly with the world can be life-changing, often providing a sense of purpose that motivates and grounds young people well into adulthood. But if that sense of purpose is based on the belief that one country or cultural group can save or fix others, these experiences may be causing more harm than good. I don't want this to become too polemic because I know it's all about growth and change, and I see so much potential here, right? My point is very simply that I do believe that the urge to help others is a very human urge, right? But the belief that we know better than somebody else how to fix their problems comes from colonialism more than anything else, right? So I don't want to get too political with you, but you understand the point is that I believe we have to really address that in the classroom when young people are growing up. We need to address it in our homes, and we really need to look for books that don't have that savior orientation where somebody's going in and fixing somebody else's issues, but is much more about human collaboration and connection and the incredible gifts and talents and ideas and solutions to the world's problems that every community has, right? I've been in lots and lots of different communities where there are always young leaders, there are always elders, there are always people who hold the knowledge of that community's history and who know what it needs next. And I don't believe that we should ever be going in and just deciding for, right? But that we could be having dialogue with, I think is really powerful. And books are one of those great ways to do it. So one of the things that I discovered in my classroom, and I've actually really learned about this because my students have come back to tell me that I did this right, which is always gratifying when it happens, right? And that is basically holding space for personal reflection and personal identity development. I think very often, even in the home, parents will often tell their kids, read this book, you're going to find it so interesting. And then the conversations at the dinner table are just about the story and not about about what we can learn from it, right? In the classroom, this happens all the time. Lots and lots of emphasis on the literary devices and things like that, but not always that time to just reflect. And I've had quite a few students come back and say, you know, what was most valuable was the time that we had to reflect. So what I did was I created, for example, journal entries. We did a lot of journaling in my class, and each one would have opportunities for reflection that would lead to discussions afterwards, opportunities, of course, for them to have to do critical thinking. But in a lot of ways, the core was that I was trying to balance the goals of literary analysis, right? I mean, I was their literature teacher and their writing teacher, right? So I did have goals that had to do with, did they understand the reading? Could they take it to deep levels? Could they unpack the complexity of something really beautiful? But I also needed to give them opportunities to think about themselves and how the story connected. And so every time they did a journal entry, there would be one question that was about the literature, and then one question that came from the literature that was about them. And many of them have come back and said those moments when I was asked to compare myself to a character or to consider whether my experiences reflected any of the things that I had read in that book, those were the moments when I started to figure out who I was, what mattered to me, what was important to me, right? And I also wanted to point out, I know a lot of teachers believe that journals always have to be for school if they're produced in school, and that that students need to assume that this is not a private personal journal. I did not follow those rules personally. I actually opted to say, if you feel that you got into territory that was too personal and you don't want me to read it, then just fold the page, right? And I'll check to make sure you did the work, right? But I won't read your entry and I'll respect your privacy. And the good news is that slowly over the course of the year, students would fold the pages less and less, and they would let me in on more and more. But that feeling of having the right to privacy allowed them to really dig deep in their journals in ways that I don't think they would have if they were always worried about my reading it afterwards. I want to make sure I don't take too long on this slide. I'm just going to mention these are just some of my favorite texts at the moment. Several of these are texts that I have taught myself or that I have encouraged other teachers to teach. And each one of them, I think, provides an insight into something particular. I really believe that the novel, whether it's in the classroom or otherwise, goes beyond just what you can learn about the English class. It usually connects to all of the disciplines. So we've got Wonder, which is an amazing book for fostering empathy and inclusion. Enrique's Journey, which is a very famous piece on the immigrant experience in Central America. Chronicle of a Death Foretold. And again, I should clarify, my list is very Latin American because I am in the Americas and rather obsessed with Latin American literature, right? But there are incredible titles from all over the world, of course. Lord of the Fly, A Chronicle of a Death Foretold, which I taught to teenage girls for 11 years, which was an incredibly helpful book for understanding their own sexuality and their own decisions. Lord of the Flies, which is incredible for understanding bullying and conflict. I just started reading Caste, and everyone I've spoken to has talked about this being a really seminal piece of nonfiction for understanding the world, and the way that our socioeconomic differences have grown. Blindness, a book by Jose Saramago, which explores both the divisiveness in human nature and our urge to connect and build community. And then one of my favorite poets, Carolyn Forshay's collection, Against Forgetting. And these are all poems written during times of war and conflict all over the world, which have been translated and brought together into one collection that allows teachers or readers in general to really see conflict, but through the eyes of the poets who experienced it. Last point that I want to make is simply to quote a former student of my own, who I got to interview for my new book. And they were the person who said, if we want our students to be able to embrace themselves as works in progress, I think we need to exhibit that. And this, I think, was a really important point too, right? That it's not just, teachers in particular and parents sometimes to get into this role of being the expert and the one who has the final word. And that idea of modeling our own challenges, modeling what we struggle with, allowing the young people in our lives and the adults in our lives too, even when it feels risky, to recognize that we see ourselves still as works in progress, that we are still on the journey and in the journey and haven't figured it all out yet. I think all of that is really, really powerful, particularly for young people to see that we are in fact fallible ourselves and don't have all of the answers. And so that brings me to the end of my slides. And thank you very much for your time. I hope that those insights were useful and give you something new to think about.
Wow, thank you so much, Jennifer. Not only was your presentation fantastically interesting, I think a lot of food for thought, but you were just on time. Thanks a lot for that presentation. Well, we've had the educational perspective with Jennifer, and I think it touches a little bit on everything that we're going to be discussing today. But now we're going to move on to something else. We're going to move on to another perspective that also has a lot to do with growth and change. We're going to be listening to our wonderful journalist, Brazilian authoress, that's going to be connecting all the way from Switzerland. Her name is Liliana Bäckert. And I'm going to see, yes, we have there you have, we have the presentation on the screen. Well, Liliana, I had the pleasure of meeting her when I was in Switzerland. We worked together on a couple of projects, and I'm very, very happy to have her here today. She published a first book not long ago, a book that is catching a lot of attention. It's a book that has to do with intercultural marriages and migration and mixed marriages and the problems of that kind of communication. She, as I said, is Brazilian and is currently working on her second book. I'm extremely happy to give the floor to Liliana, to invite her to speak to us. Let's see if we can see her on the screen. Liliana, can you please turn your camera on and then please make your presentation to us. Welcome and thank you. Liliana? Oh, I think she might be having some technical difficulties. Let's see if Liliana can join us. Liliana, hello, are you there? Can you hear us? Okay, I'm afraid we had some technical difficulties with Liliana. We will wait for her. In the meantime, we're going to move forward with the program. Sorry for this last minute change. Javeria, could you please share the slide with the introduction to Darren Fink, another person I love to meet and introduce today. I want you to meet Darren because Darren and I also go a few years back. We have never met in person, but we've virtually worked together for quite a while. I can tell you a lot about Darren, but I will be very brief so as to give the floor to him. Darren is an expert in foster parenting and fostering kids and in supporting kids that go through trauma. So yes, this is educational, but not only. This is also human, and this is also like more family oriented. He created a few years ago a nonprofit that is called Transfiguring Adoption together with his wife, and is the author of Guide to Magical Creatures Around Your Home. It's a book series which entertains, but also helps kids process past trauma. But not only that, he fosters or he directs a program to help parents help children through book reading. So I think he is a perfect author to have here with us today. After that, I know Liliana is already connecting with us. I'm getting a message that she is connecting with us. So let's first listen to Darren now because I introduced him, and then we will move on to Liliana later. Sorry for this, you know, this is what happens when we're live. These things happen. Darren, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here with everyone. It's a nice sunshiny day here in Florida where I'm at, so it's just a great day to be with everyone. I'm going to get my slides shared here real quick. I think they are up. It looks good. Yeah, as Jessica was mentioning, I am the president and co-founder of a nonprofit named Transfiguring Adoption. Transfiguring Adoption nurtures growth in foster and adoptive children by showing their parents how to use movies, books, video games, and even everyday play to help children process past trauma. And just a little bit of background on me. I actually have my studies from university in fine art. So all of these graphic designs that if you go to our website, you'll see I do a lot of the graphic design. But I also had, when I was even in university, I had a strong interest in the psychology and sociology of humanity. My wife has her education in psychology. And so we've actually found that through our whole experiences, we've actually been able to draw upon a lot of our talents and things that we were bred for to help children that are coming from a traumatic past. So a little bit more about me. There's my wonderful family. My wife and I are foster and adoptive parents. We have fostered several different children in our home. We have over a decade of personal experience now. These slides are somewhat old. We have 4 children that are adopted out of foster care. And that's where our journey really began, when we were looking at how to use literature and different forms of media to help people process trauma. Because we quickly discovered while we were fostering children that there were quite a few things that we were not trained for, that we were not told about, how trauma can impact a brain and impact a person as they are going through life. A lot of people ask me about foster children and adoptive children and their needs. And they're surprised when I tell them that 100% of children that are going through the foster care system have suffered trauma. That's all of them. There are varying degrees of trauma, but just even the fact that they have been separated from their birth families is a trauma enough. We're talking even a child that is coming straight, that experienced the separation coming straight from the womb is coming across enough trauma to impact their mind and impact their brain that they're going to need a little bit extra help than quote the typical person. And the other thing that we're finding too is a lot of people are talking in schools, especially with Jennifer is just talking about the education system, is we're finding that people are talking more and more about adverse childhood experiences and what those mean for our children and how those are impacting them and their brain activity. And a lot of people will think of adverse childhood experience as being abuse, neglect, being from a family where there were drugs and alcohol and those are the big ones that people normally jump to when they think about it. But a lot of things that they're not thinking about are adverse childhood experiences are also racism, having to deal with racism in an area, bullying, loss of a caregiver, homelessness. And now a new one that's been added is the COVID pandemic. Which is something that I know here in America, it was interesting for me to watch this phenomenon because I was so concerned about the foster and adoptive families that we were already serving. And I was worried how the pandemic was going to hit them. And what I found personally was that our traditional families that we saw out in our communities were actually hit a lot harder with the COVID pandemic because they weren't dealing with and coping with trauma in their households already. And so the COVID pandemic was introducing that to them, and they were having a lot harder time being introduced to it. The reason I'm talking about adverse childhood experiences is because it introduces something we call toxic stress. We all deal with different kinds of stress throughout the day. My wife does a lovely workshop on all of this, and I'm giving you the very, very bare minimum cliff notes on this. Toxic stress coming from adverse childhood experiences is what we call is going to have the impact of it's going to alter your memory functions, executive functioning, self-regulations, and you can look at the other things there on the slide. And when I'm talking about toxic stress, there are different kinds of stress. We have positive stress, which is something that you might have at work or you might have at school, which is stress to get something done. It gives you your motivation to complete a task or complete a project. There's intermediate stress, which we just went through in our household, where we were having a project done to our home, and the contractor found that there was mold behind the walls. And this led to us having to go several months longer on the project without a bedroom, and our home was just in disarray. But there was a light at the end of the tunnel. We made plans. We were able to form together as a family and figure out how we were going to get through the situation. So it was more than the typical stress, but we were able to band together as a family, and we knew that there was an end in sight. Toxic stress is going to be going above and beyond that. So with toxic stress, we're going to find that this is going to start over prolonged periods of time. This is going to start impacting our brains. This is going to be where we're going to see children having troubles doing things like they're going to have lack of cause and effect thinking. They're going to have sensory integration and regulation issues. Management of fear and anxiety is going to be difficult for them. So it's definitely something that we need to take a look at. Considering, again, adverse childhood experiences, the COVID pandemic has now been added to it. So one thing that we were looking at is when we started looking at our own children coming from foster care and adoption and the trauma that they've been through, we quickly discovered that literature was able to help them when we discovered that our 12-year-old son was able to connect with different characters in books. And he was able to talk about his experiences from life going through books. And one reason, I'm going to jump into the next slide, which is going to be talking about this concept of bibliotherapy, which is the whole theme of what we're doing at Transfiguring Adoption and the books that I've put out. But one thing I wanted to note real quick is while we really think that caregivers are significant to this process, while I will always tell someone they need to seek professional help, they need to go work with their therapist, they need to work with the professionals in their life, that is key. Caregivers also have an important part in our lives because they see us the most often. They see our children the most often. A quote that I love from the late Dr. Karen Purvis is, "Our children were harmed in relationship and they will come to experience healing in relationship." And I think that is really important to this next concept called bibliotherapy. Bibliotherapy is not a new concept. Aristotle actually was found to have been using bibliotherapy. The term itself was coined about 100 years ago. So we're talking in 1916. So while the phrase might only be 100 years old, it's been used for centuries. It's the process in which specific literature, both fiction and nonfiction, was prescribed as medicine for a variety of ailments. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me take a quick example of what I tell people, and it has to do with a movie and not a book. So just bear with me here, you guys. We're going to go off literature for a little while. Let's take, I have a little foster girl that enters my home, and she is just bananas about fictional characters. She loves unicorns. She loves mermaids. She loves all fairies. Unfortunately, my daughter that I have in my home also is afraid that she might go hungry. So what we have here, because in her previous home, maybe they didn't have enough food. So what she does is she starts hoarding food in her room. That is going to upset me when I find these hoards of food in her room, because we have decaying food. It's ruining my home. It's causing just a lot of pressure between me and my daughter. So usually what happens between a parent and a child at that point is they butt heads and they get angry and they yell. Now, looking at this whole process of bibliotherapy, another approach that I can take is I can, during just a regular family movie night, knowing that she loves fictitious characters, what if we watched The Little Mermaid? Disney's Little Mermaid. Ariel, the main character in The Little Mermaid, if you haven't seen it, loves to collect and hoard human objects from the land. She has a whole cave full of human objects, and they have a whole song that her collection isn't complete, and she just keeps getting more and more and more and more. Let's watch that. And now afterwards, let's have a conversation about hoarding and collecting items and what that looks like. And we're going to process and go through that a lot easier without argument, without yelling. And why is that? It's because Ariel, the Little Mermaid, is in the hot seat. She's taking all of the pressure. She's taking all of the heat. And I'm not pointing out, and we're not pointing fingers at each other, and we're not yelling at each other. It's indirectly working on the issue. But eventually I am going to bring it back around and say, the next time I find a hoard in my kiddo's room, I'm going to say, hey, remember when we watched that movie Remember how we were talking about that? So we're going to bring things around and we're going to work and we're going to process through things. But we've already done the heat of the work and the real battle after watching this movie and not directly working with my child. So the best parts about this, like we were just talking about, is using bibliotherapy with children is it's going to be giving them their voice. And a lot of our children, especially younger children that can't articulate their words, we're going to find that it gives them voice and it gives them an identity where they might not be able to express that or express their needs. But now they can say, hey, that character in that book, do you see that? That's me. That's how I feel. And that's exactly what happened with my 12-year-old son. It helps unstick a person because they can see how other characters are moving past situations or how another character can't move past a situation. And so they're able to see, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should do something different. And they're able to work through a lot of situations like that. Now, as good as bibliotherapy, and again, my wife, if you guys get really interested in this, she has a great workshop on this that dives way deeper into this. Again, I'm giving you the cliff notes. There are dangers with using this bibliotherapy model with any type of media. Specifically, sometimes in the States at least, parents can be nervous about talking about the deep issues with our children, and we want them just to figure it out on their own. And we're too scared to have those conversations. I would hope this model would help, but sometimes it doesn't. If there's no adult on duty, we can see that our children might be triggered by past trauma or past events. Past things might take them back there. And without an adult on duty to help them work past that, they're going to be living in past trauma that they've already lived through. They might live in a dream world. So they might be working on an issue. They might be wanting to move past something. And they read a fairy tale where everything ends roses and rainbows. And they think that's reality. They think that's the way I can have it, which might sound absurd to some of you watching, but I've literally talked to adult adoptees that for the longest time in their situation, they thought their birth parents were going to magically show up in their adoptive parents' house and take them home and whisk them away back to a mansion, and everything was going to be fine. Never really finding answers to how things should end or how to move past certain situations. Never finding solutions. We have more life situations, life experiences than children do. So whether we're a therapist, a teacher, or a parent, we need to be there with our children to walk through these situations so that we can warn them of these pitfalls or tell them how life might really be so that they don't fall into these dangers of reliving trauma or living in a dream world. We need to be there on duty with them. It's imperative. So one tool that we have developed at Transfiguring Adoption, we look at everything, how we can take this bibliotherapy model and show parents, especially how to use this for children that have come from traumatized past, which we're moving more and more to children that are dealing with ACEs, including like a traumatic divorce or the COVID pandemic. Like Jessica mentioned, we have a book called A Guide to Magical Creatures Around Your Home. And I don't have it listed there. It's an activity book that introduces your family to different fictitious characters in a field guide format. And then you go through it, you play, you bond with your children. You're able to have fun and just pretend enough. And then the fun part is that parents get a downloadable PDF book that has playful engagement activities to go along with each character. So you're able to work on issues like nighttime terrors. You're able to work on food issues. You're able to work on sensory issues, different things that children, etiquette things that children might be dealing with. You're able to work through those through play, which is our children's language, is play. And you're not sitting down, again, like going back to the Little Mermaid model, you're not going back down and saying, this is what we're working on. You're doing it through play. Gruett's Hope that you see there, the book that's on there, I'd love for you guys, if you want to know more about it, go to magicalcreatures.com. This is our newest book. It's taking the creatures that we had in the activity book and putting them in a story format. So while the activity book, we do have elementary and middle school teachers that are using it. We also have parents of teenagers that are adapting it, the activities. People are like, well, aren't teenagers too old for that? Well, you know, you adapt the play, and they know that it's pretend. They know that it's pretend. I'd love for you guys to check that out. I'd also love for you guys to check out our media review service. Our team at Transfiguring Adoption goes through, they look at popular media, and they actually make packets so that you can see how to move past trauma with your kids. Looking forward to talking to you guys more in our chat session here, but thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Darren. Didn't I tell you he was a fantastic character that was going to share some incredible ideas with us? There you go. So now, yes, now we're going to go back to Liliana Tinoco Bäckert, who's going to give us a completely different perspective. She's going to talk about growth and change from her own personal and professional point of view. Let me reintroduce Liliana. Once again, we couldn't have her on screen, but we have her now. So let me introduce Liliana once again. I will very briefly tell you that she's Brazilian. She's a journalist by training and now an author. She published her first book on international marriages. It's Amores Internacionais. I think it's in Portuguese. I don't know if it's been translated yet. She is currently living in Switzerland since 2005 and is right now writing her second book. Liliana, now yes, go for it.
Hi everyone, do you see me well? Yeah. So thank you very much for inviting me for this so interesting event. I have to excuse for the English speakers because it's not my mother language. As Jessica said, I am Brazilian and I have lived 32 years of my life in Brazil and since 2005 in Switzerland, where I have to speak German, not English. So, and I didn't bring any slides because I thought it would be good if I could take the storytelling model to talk about a little bit of this world of the binational marriages. I wanted so much to bring that into my researches because it comes from my own cultural shock. When I moved to Switzerland because of marriage, I married a German who I met in Rio, my hometown, in 2002. And because of due to this cultural shock, I started to study intercultural communications here in Switzerland in 2015. Imagine, I was living here from 2005, and in 2015, and it's so connected with the book, with the knowledge, the importance of the knowledge and being really the first character of your story. You have to be this person, and for that you need to learn and study, and why not writing? So therefore, I have to go back to this point. When I started suffering so much, coming from a city like Rio de Janeiro, tropical weather and all cultural differences involved, and then living in a country in the German part of Switzerland. So then in 2015, tired of suffering every day from cultural differences, I decided to study. Then I took a master in intercultural communications, and I decided to write, my thesis was about the cultural barriers faced by Brazilian women in the German part of Switzerland, so 2 years after. But the interesting thing was, besides discovering these barriers, which were very much connected to the language and the way people communicate here, the way they are shy, on all these things, as a journalist, I could see that there was a lack of information, an enormous lack of information for this community. Because when you talk about Brazilian women, and my book is about Brazilian women marrying foreigners, not only Swiss, but coming back now, jumping to this topic, when we talk about Brazilian people migrating, you were talking about an enormous country with people who are not very well educated, I mean, in a formal education. Less than 5% of these people speak English fluently. And I cannot say how many people can really read and write, but it's also a big community who can barely read and write and understand a text. And then you take all these women, all these migrants that migrate not only because of marriage, but most of them in Switzerland migrate because of marriage, especially women. But they go with their husbands when they have a job outside the country, or they go like to the US to work as illegal. So you have so many people who take this step, but they have no idea what does it mean in their lives. And I thought I could bring this lack of information to this marriage, to this binational marriage, let's say, sector. Because here in Switzerland, for example, 49% of the marriages are binational. And a very part of these 49% are Brazilian women with Swiss men, imagine. And then what happens that it's really needs a knowledge. There are lots of books about binational marriages, but all in English and about an American guy who marries an Indian and she cooks curry and it's not comfortable because of the taste, the smell, or a guy from Texas who marries a Mexican, but there was nothing related to our community. And then there are so many Brazilian women married to so many men, and I decided to interview 60 women, 15 professionals related to this topic. And these women are married for the book, married with 90 men from 19 countries, different countries. And for me, it was so interesting to see the reaction of all these ladies that they had no idea when you take such a step in your life, what does it mean for you to move abroad or to have a foreigner in your family? What does it mean to raise a child in a binational environment? What language are you going to speak? Is your husband, is your partner criticizing you based on cultural differences? Because you can have many beautiful stories, but you can also have lots of oppression based and hidden in the cultural differences. So you can have lots of lonely problems, even human trafficking in marriages. Can you imagine that a man from a first world country goes to countries like Brazil, or where people are vulnerable, where they face economical vulnerability, and they marry these women, they bring to their countries, and there they face slavery. They have to work as prostitutes. I had all these cases in the book, and it was really interesting that people, sometimes they are so vulnerable in their countries that they want to go away. They want to find they call it gringo, a foreigner, because they think they will have all solutions for their lives, but they don't have the idea that they're changing a package of problems A for a package of problems B, and maybe even worse, because you don't have your network in this country. So I really wanted to bring up these issues and show the women, what does it mean? That's why the book is called, in Portuguese, Amores Internacionais, And in English, I would say like International Love Affairs. I don't know if you agree with this translation, Jessica. And then I have
Liliana, I would translate it as love relationships or love stories, international love stories.
Okay, international love stories. And then I say I married a foreigner, and so what? It's like, it's not a guide. It's really a journalistic book with lots of scenarios where I've talked about loneliness, as I said, self-respect, bilingualism, raising a child in another culture, or, for example, flirting, because the flirting is different. I tackle many issues related to this intimacy between different couples. So, and I think the traumas can be, in many situations, not cured, but maybe minimized with the knowledge, because the book is a tool in order to make you understand who are you in this context. I think that's it.
Wow, that's a completely different and new perspective. Thanks so much, Liliana. I know you must have touched a lot of hearts and a lot of people with your presentation. Off to you again, Javeria.
Yeah, I was listening to her, and definitely adopting new cultures, language, tradition. It's not an easy thing, but in every society, woman has to do it. And I think it's a great contribution from your side that you have added all your personal experiences with you're sharing your personal experiences with others to guide them when they are starting their new journey of life. So it's a great contribution. Thank you so much, Liliana.
Thank you.
And I like the style, the storytelling, because storytelling it's always effective tool if you're sharing something more than slides in a formal presentation. So I really like it. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you're enjoying the thought-provoking presentations and talks by our wonderful guests. Now moving towards our final and fourth guest, Dr. Paul, who's waiting from so long. And let me share his profile with you guys. Okay, so can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay, Dr. Paul Hokemeyer, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is a fellow in the Global Leaders in Healthcare program at Harvard Medical School, a licensed marriage and family therapist, consultant, and author. He's one of the world's foremost experts in the treatment of anxiety disorders and complex identity constructs. In his groundbreaking book, Fragile Power, Why Having It All Is Never Enough, Dr. Paul sets forth a new standard for culturally competent and clinically effective care for individuals and families who struggle with mental health, personality, relational, and addictive disorders. His work has been utilized by the World Economic Forum and featured in a host of international publications. Wow, it's amazing. You are working on a multi-dimensional front, Dr. Paul. Thanks for joining. Please go ahead.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be part of Read Pakistan and the International Institute of Humanology. And so I'm actually thrilled that I get to go last, because I got the benefit of hearing from really extraordinary thought leaders in this space. And I feel a little intimidated because of the really the technology that was used. And I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I have like a pen and paper that I use to sketch out some of the notes that I have to talk about. So again, thank you. My name is Dr. Paul Hokemeyer. I am here in America, although my practice, I have an international psychotherapy practice that's based in London called Drace and Muse, and I have the privilege of working with families all over the world. And probably 50% of my work is in the Middle East, and so I have the great privilege of working with cultures who really understand the importance of connection and healing through families and communities and religion. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about. My talk is going to be more focused on the individual process of change and growth. And so, Jessica Lockhart, she's this is the second time that I've had the opportunity to participate in a panel, and Jessica just drops these topics. She doesn't give any kind of explanation around it. She just drops these topics, and she gives us enough time to think about them. And so Jessica approached me about two and a half weeks ago, and I've had the opportunity to really think about what I wanted to talk about. And like Liliana was talking about, this nature of the work has relevance in its autobiographical component, and the fact that how it's impacted our life. And my life has been a narrative of change and growth. I was born in America to middle-class parents, and the dominant cultural message that I received was that money and power and success, external markers of success, were the keys to the kingdom. And if you just have those, then you can live a life that's happy, joyous, and free. And I soon found out that wasn't the case. I had a pretty traditional upbringing. I went to university and I studied economics. And then I married a woman who was a doctor, and then I decided to go to law school. So we had this like externally perfect life. I soon found out that neither one of those identities was consistent with who I am, and I was able to leave the practice of law, and I left the marriage, and I went into the realm of philanthropy, and I was doing environmental justice in Amsterdam. I worked for Greenpeace International in Amsterdam, and September 11th happened, and as a white privileged American, the security of my world had pretty much been guaranteed, and on that day, really the trajectory of my life changed dramatically, and the security of my world was threatened in a very profound way. And I think living abroad, living in a foreign country, enabled me to have this really important perspective. And so I moved back to America, and thinking that perhaps that I definitely had an existential crisis, and I needed to change the trajectory of my life. And so I went into mental health, behavioral health, because I thought that the process of healing and growth was particularly relevant to the next phase of my life. And I did a master's degree in clinical psychology, and then I did a PhD in psychology, looking at identity constructs. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, because I think our unique identity is very relevant, but it's relevant in the context. And so with that as a bit of a background, I'm living now in rural Colorado, which I'm living around 3,000 meters above sea level. So the air is quite thin here, but the skies are quite blue. And I was out for a run the other day, and I was listening to music, and I was listening to a group called the Indigo Girls. I don't know whether if you're American, you probably know them. If you know, I suspect you don't. But I encourage you to look them up. And it's two women, and they have a song that's called "Closer to Fine." And I'm just going to read you some of the lyrics because they're just powerful lyrics. And the song is a narrative of moving from darkness to light, of change and growth, of looking how to improve the quality of our existence. And the song opens with a line that says, "Darkness has a hunger that's insatiable, and lightness has a call that's hard to heal." And I think that's so important, because we can get so caught up in the darkness, right? And so it's so easy for us to fall into the darkness. And we have to kind of continue. Growth and change requires being able to attach to that light, no matter, even if that light is very dim, it's being able to recognize where that light is. And so in recognizing this, the musician said, to move from the darkness to the light. They said, "I went to the doctor, I went to the mountains, I looked to the children, I drank from the fountains. There's more than one answer to these questions pointing me in a crooked line. And the less I seek my source for some definitive, the closer that I am to find." And I think for me and in the patients that I seek, that I treat around the world, that everybody's looking for a thing to move them in a reparative direction. And really what meaningful change and growth happens, it happens through an intentional process. So that we need to be intentional in our desire to change and to grow. And we need to do that from an identity standpoint on 3 significant levels of our existence. The first of these levels is what's called the intrapersonal. So it's my self-concept, my level of self-esteem, how I view myself, what's my motivation in the world. The second that's critically important is interpersonally, and Liliana talked about that, the importance of what happens to us in human relationship, and particularly with significant relationships in our lives. And the third that's critically important that we need to be focused on is the social cultural, and I include the spiritual in that because human beings exist in a context, and we need to make sure that we're very cognizant of the context in which we are existing. And so when I work with my patients, because when people come into psychotherapy, when they come in to see a therapist, they're stuck. They're stuck in some significant point of their life. They're stuck in a bad relationship. They're feeling frustrated in their professional endeavors. They're weighted down by extraordinary depression. They're paralyzed by anxiety. So there's this element of stuckness that we need to push through. And so because I'm a lawyer, I tend to be very pragmatic in my approach to things. And I think it's very important for human beings to have an intentional strategic plan about their life. And so what I work with my patients is to come up with really a strategic plan in terms of these 3 significant, I put up 5 fingers, but what I really meant was 3 significant levels of our existence. And so the first that I want to talk about is in the intrapersonal. And I think we can get caught up in our society. I remember when I was, some of the advice that I have gotten in my path was just be yourself. Well, what is that? That's a little overwhelming. And what I am this morning, when I wake up in the morning and I'm very grumpy and I my partner don't look at me before I have a cup of coffee, it's quite different, right? By the end of the day. So this notion of, I think in our society, in our cultures, plural, we tend to throw around a lot of be authentic. Well, that's pretty overwhelming, isn't it? So you need to be more specific. And so when I talk about who I am or be yourself or be authentic, I think we just need to have a general concept of that, right? So the 3 areas that I think are relatively significant are, the first is our gender identity. And so do we identify, gender is a spectrum, right? And so do we identify more with feminine qualities, or do we identify more with male qualities? I am a male, but I identify more with gender, and so from a female. And so that's basically what I just got a chat and I was just interrupted by by my technology. I thought I was going in the wrong direction, but that doesn't seem to be the case, which is good. And the other bit of our identity that I think we need to get clear on is, are we an introvert or an extrovert? So, and again, these occur on a spectrum. I tend to be very introverted. And then the third that I think is critically important is, do we live in a world of abundance or scarcity? And so I think that if we have a sense of these 3 significant identities, then we can really begin to make some intelligent decisions in terms of the direction of growth and change that we want to go to. And the second element that we need to take a look at when we're considering how we're going to grow and change in our life is the I get these confused, the interpersonal, which is our significant relationships. And so we need to know who is on our team, right? And we don't need a big team. I think that we need basically 2 or 3 people who are on our team, right? Who can assist us in this journey of change and growth. And ideally, as part of that team, we need to have one person who is a mentor, who is further down the road than we are. And then we need somebody else who's a mentee, who we can kind of guide and shepherd, and who we are further ahead of. And so we get this dynamic set of interpersonal relationships that, again, can move us in a reparative direction. And then the third is critically important, and that is who is in our tribe. One of the things that we tend to forget is that human beings, we're very primal in nature. We're animals. We dress up well. We have good technology, all of that. But we're primal. We're animals, and we're pulled by animal instincts. And one of those is that we're tribal. And so part of being in a tribe is that we organize around a common interest and against a common foe. So we need to know who our tribe is so that we can have their support. And I think part of this tribe is having a connection to some sort of higher purpose, to some sort of spiritual community. Like I said, I have the privilege of working with a lot of families in the Middle East, and operating within those deeply held religious traditions and understanding what those are. They're very curative, they're very reparative, and so being able to connect with those. So once we have a clear understanding of who we are intrapersonally, who our primary team of others is interpersonally, and then who our tribe is from a social cultural standpoint, then we can continue to be intentional in our path of healing and change by coming up with a very concrete mission statement that says, I am a Muslim woman, I am a Muslim woman who is on a journey of healing and hope. And then once we have that statement in place, then we can move into our daily lives with focus and with intentionality. One of the other things that we know empirically from our brain is that our brains are reductive in nature. We live in a world where we're overstimulated. So there's so much information that we can take into our psyche that we have to be very focused, and we have to be very reductive and focus on intention. And one of the other things that I found both in my personal life and in my clinical practice is that which we focus on expands. So if I'm looking for love, I will find love. If I'm looking for rejection, I'll find rejection. If I'm looking for compassion, I'll find compassion. If I'm looking for understanding, I will find more and more understanding. And so it's taking that into our daily life and focusing on that which we need to grow. And quite frankly, rejecting that which we don't want in our life. You know, living in America, we have had very tumultuous for America. Not for the rest of the world, but we just came out of a very rough political period where our democracy was being put into question, and I got very caught up in the media surrounding that, and it was making me very angry and very contentious. And I recognized that I needed to monitor, I needed to cut out that anger and all of that hostility that was around that. So it's coming up with an intentional mission statement for our life, knowing who we are, coming up with a mission statement for our life, and then moving with intentionality along a path of healing and change and growth. So that's what I have to add to this conversation. And again, it's a privilege to be here, and I look forward to being on a panel with my other esteemed colleagues.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Paul. And again, it's a treat for me to hear you. And definitely agree that if you want to excel in life, then we have to come out from our comfort zone to the growth zone. But we have to enjoy everything which is coming to us. And I love the lyrics you shared that definitely is, if there is no dark, then we cannot, know the importance of light. I mean, if there is no, we cannot know the importance of light, there is no dark, basically, because
That's right.
we can't value the good things if we don't experience the bad things, actually. So and giving hope and motivation to the people, especially the women, because women basically are the center of the family. They create society. They are giving birth to the people, and they're nurturing the generations. So I think you're doing a great job. So thanks to all wonderful speakers. We really learned a lot today through your thought-provoking presentations and your personal experience and storytelling telling sessions, and amazing. Now we are moving towards our panel discussion, and my co-moderator, Ms. Jessica G. Lockhart, is going to start our panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Javeria. Well, you heard our 4 fantastic authors. I'm sure you enjoyed all their presentations, and I'm sure you also have a lot of questions for them. Well, we're going to start the panel discussion by asking them each 3 questions, after which you will have time to pose your questions. You can start just typing your questions in, sending them through Messenger to us so we can read them to them, and you will get your answers as well. So please, if you have any questions for any or all of our presentators and speakers today, just send them to us. We will make sure they answer them. And for our 4 guests today, the first question says, how do you think books help human beings understand who they are? I know that the 4 speakers have somehow touched on this topic in their presentations, but because they were given the questions ahead of time, I'm sure they also prepared something that they wanted to add to their presentations in answering this question. So how do you think books help human beings understand who they are? Liliana, would you like to begin?
Hi, Jessica, thank you. So I'm really amazed how the presentations, how interesting the presentations were. So I think, Jessica, books have been for centuries very, very important in human growth, development, enlightenment. But I have the impression that nowadays, with that much information that we have and so much fake news, so many contradictions, people trying to people coming with stories that have nothing to do with science or studies, important researches. And I think nowadays books are just one of the most important tools. But on the other hand, always paying attention in which book are you reading, right? But I think you really need to select, as Dr. Paul said, focus on important things, because the information is popping up and you have so much rubbish. And so in times of fake news, you really have to follow science and people who really study and are writing interesting and real things, not rubbish.
Thank you so much, Liliana. What's your take on this question, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, Jennifer was talking about the importance of books and how they mirror back and they give us an opportunity, a window to look into the experience of others. And then Liliana extended that to the fact that we're living in a time where people have a very short attention span. And so getting a person to read a book is an extraordinary challenge. My book, Fragile Power, was a very long process that continues on. 5 years in writing the book, and then getting it published by Hazelden, and then getting it distributed by Simon and Schuster, and then now like bringing it into the world, and finding people who are interested in sitting down and investing the time to read a book is rather extraordinary. We're all interested, the world has become accustomed to these sound bites, and so delivering content that's dynamic, that's relevant, that can reach an audience. I mean, you can write one of the best books in the world, but if it just sits on a shelf and no one reads it, then it's really not doing it. So organizations like Read Pakistan, which is brilliant in terms of encouraging reading, but figuring out delivering the. I mean, I made a note from Jennifer where she's talked about the authenticity, the complexity, and the relevance of the book, and so figuring out in this world of sound bites and social media how to make that happen. When books first came out, I think it was Aristotle or Socrates said, "There goes our minds," right? Because now we have all this stuff written down, so we won't have to remember anything. A lot of that just we're seeing with the internet as well. So I think they're critically important. The challenge as an author is to create format that reaches an audience that can consume it in a meaningful way.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. As an author myself, I fully understand and grasp what you're saying and share it. Jennifer, you give us a different perspective as well. What would you say here? What would you add to what you already told us that was so interesting?
Well, and I when I first encountered the question, I was like, oh, I think I already put something in there about windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors. But yeah, I mean, I really think that books allow us to, I believe it's the Navajo who have a proverb about walking a mile in someone else's moccasins, right? Being able to really see reality and experience from other people's perspectives. And I think especially in times that are politically charged, one of the things that we can discover is that literature can get around the politics sometimes in a way that's really powerful. I did a lot of work for a while bringing Palestinian voices into US classrooms, which was some of the hardest work I've ever done because there was so much pushback and so much that just immediately exploded the moment that I suggested that there was a perspective not being heard in the media, right? But what we found was that poetry, for example, could get people there. Young people could read the poem of a young person growing up in Palestine and see the world and reality through their eyes. And sometimes even students who were really deeply resistant to the entire conversation would say, how can I argue with her experience, right? How can I argue with something that very simply captures that this is what my life is like? So it allowed them entry into something that they couldn't have understood otherwise, right? I think in a lot of ways it allows, reading and books allow us to see the good, the bad, the ugly. I remember having some really incredible conversations with young people through Lord of the Flies, for example, right? Because everyone identifies with someone. Anytime you have a novel like that with almost every archetype of human personality demonstrated in the book, everybody finds somebody they relate to. And sometimes that's a good feeling, right? Like I relate to the good leader. Sometimes it was students coming up to me saying, oh my God, I think I just realized I'm Jack, right? Meaning that I'm the negative leader who heads everything in the wrong direction, right? And what do I need to learn about myself through that? So I really think that it comes down to how much we allow ourselves to enter the text. And I think too, of course, we got to make sure that kids have experiences with what's beautiful about human experience too, right? That we don't just look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? But that we really make sure that they have experiences where they get a chance to define what beauty is and what they consider beautiful and how they want to live in a way that's thoughtful and beautiful in its own way. So I think all of this allows us to do so.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. I think that aligns very much with what you were saying, Darren. Do you agree? What else would you like to add?
No, I like the analogy there of putting on moccasins, because I feel like, even again, coming from, my first training was in graphic design. So I like the whole idea of the Command Z the undo button, like where you can try to do something and then you can undo it. I like the idea that literature, it enables us to try on like a moccasin. It allows us to try on a variety of different outfits from different cultures and different places, and look at them and examine them and see, how do I fit into this, and where is my identity? Where's my identity not? Where do I see myself inside of this? And it helps us to not only become a part of a world conversation, but it helps us to figure out who we are as a person. And like we were already discussing here, I think several people, but I'm remembering Paul talking about it specifically, just identity and who we are. And it's part of how we're going to become successful. It's how we become unstuck, if you will, like, and we move forward as a person to become more successful. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Really, Jennifer, I think really hit a lot of what I would say with that.
Oh, thanks so much, Darren. Javeria, I think you have the second question ready for our experts today.
Actually, they already answered the second question, because I was going to ask the role of books, in the community and growth and change. Just one question came up in my mind, because we all know what is the purpose of reading. We have read so many articles. Reading is important. Books are this and that. But what I personally experience, that youth, they are not more into this reading habit, and there are more screening. And most of the time, what they're asking, send me the PDF link, or I will read on the Tinder. They are not interested to go to the bookstore and buy the books, actually. So how we should, incorporate this habit into our youth personally, because, and most of the time they are saying, we are enough with our academic courses and, the school books, university books, we are done with, we're enough with that. But of course, they have to read the literature also. So how we should, encourage them to be habitual of reading, the paper reading, basically, I'm talking about. Starting from Jennifer or Darren, of course, because I like the idea, like fun, learning with fun. Like most of the time, kids like to, enjoy the reading books which are pictorial. So what would you suggest in that?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the ways that we would encourage families to make that a habit is, it's going back to that quote that I gave, that our children were, the children that I'm working with, we're looking at how they were harmed. They were harmed in relationship. How are they going to move past that? They're going to move past it in relationship as well. So a lot of times what I find works well is it's sitting down, it's having that intentional time with your children, that you're sitting down and you're reading together. They're not even the ones necessarily reading, but they're listening to you read, and that's modeling. Going back again, what we were talking about, again, I'm remembering what Paul was talking about, where you're now the mentor and they're your mentee. You're going through and you're showing them, this is how I read, this is how I'm getting things from the text, this is how. So it's you're taking on the role of a teacher in your own household and showing them how they're going to do that, so that they can model that for their families, whatever their family might look like in the future. It might just be them having a student in an after-school program or something that they're modeling it for later. But it needs to happen in context of a relationship and handing down these skills and these abilities. The last thing I'll say is, I mean, I'm a very animated person. I'm an extrovert. I have no problem talking to people on the side of the street that I don't know, because I'm kind of quirky. I have fun making up voices when I read chapter books to my kids, and they love it. And so that's even modeled, just even how I read things is how they then want to read stories to other people. They want to make up voices. And I know for other families, I've been there in rare moments when other people have had story times with their kids and they don't do voices. And their kids have just as much fun, but it's the relationship that really bonds it together.
Yeah, thank you so much. Jennifer, you want to say something?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I like the journal thing. It's amazing. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. And I think a lot of it too has to do with what kinds of reading kids are exposed to in school. I don't want to throw teachers under the bus or make it sound like they make terrible choices all the time or anything like that. But I do think that we have a long history in education all over the world of teaching certain books because we're supposed to, and because kids are supposed to have read this before they graduate from 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, university, without much of an eye to whether it's actually still relevant or interesting for them. So that's why I focused in on that question of complexity and relevance and authenticity, not just for the teacher, but for the kid, right? What does relevant look like for them? What's going to get them excited? What's going to make them question and explore and understand things in a different way? I think that's a huge, huge piece of it. And I think that's true in terms of reading choices at home as well. The other thing I would say is, I mean, I totally agree with Darren. My mother spent both of my parents, but particularly my mother spent so much time reading to me and then ultimately reading with me that I was reading at 5, right? I was reading well at 5 and I was reading chapters at 6, or chapter books, I should say, at 6. But that was largely because of her effort. I was a difficult older child, and so my sister didn't get the benefit of quite as much of that personalized care. And we didn't even realize she was memorizing all the books and not actually able to read until she was in 3rd grade, right? Because she had a perfect memory. But because my mother didn't spend as much time doing it, she didn't come away with as much of the love of reading. She came into it later as an adult. But one of the things that we grew up as what we call latchkey kids in English, meaning that we came home to an empty house, right? Both of our parents worked. And so we would spend summers taking the public bus to the library and spending full days at the public library. And I know that not every kid thinks that that sounds fun, but I think if you start that kind of practice early, they can fall in love with reading and even really just fall in love with the role of the librarian who's there to get them excited about reading, right? You know, I would drop my sister off in the early reading section and head off to another section myself. And when I came back, I would find that she was being taken care of and, sparked with new books by lots of different librarians. It was an incredible, incredible experience. So I think that's a piece of it too, modeling the excitement, as you said, Darren, but also giving them chances to explore books in different settings other than school and making sure that the choices are really meaningful to them.
Meaningful, yes. Yeah, that is a mission and vision of Read Pakistan. Basically, we have launched the largest, history's largest campaign to establish libraries in Pakistan, because in rural areas, we don't have libraries, and we are doing that. Dr. Paul, what's your take on this?
Going to be a bit of a contrarian here. I think in terms of paper books, I love a paper book, but I'm, a middle-aged man, so I grew up with paper books. I love the tactile nature. I read a lot of nonfiction, so I'm always underlining it. But, I think we have to be realistic and recognize that it is a dying art, and so that the younger kids are not doing paper books. India is a big market for paper books still, but in any event, but I think that we need to deliver, we need to audiobooks. My book is the bestseller, has been a consistent book bestseller on Audible. Everyone's doing Audible books. I know that the kids in our family love an audiobook, and figuring out a way that you can deliver context to kids that makes it interesting and sexy. And so, images are critically important. Instagram is very popular and you create narrative through images. And so I think going to the technology and going digital and through audio and through digital content is the way to do it. And I also think that, it's a fundamental tenet of community psychology where you have to find the community leaders. So you have to find the peers in those particular demographics who you want to encourage, and find the leader, and then the leader will make it cool. So it's, but it's really access, availability, and interest. So making it cool through a peer leader, and then delivering it in a medium that resonates to the particular population.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Yes, Liliana, do you want to add something?
Sorry. So I would like to add the fact, maybe because I am a journalist and I was taught at the university always to write in the most simple way I can do. So then I think our duty is to translate complicated messages that people, very simple people like my grandmother at home, can understand. And I think sometimes so many messages are lost, so many important messages are lost because people use so complicated language, academical language. That's why I wrote my book for these Brazilian women married to foreign men. And I always thought about the ladies who have difficult to read complicated things. I think people have to abandon many of the times this academical language and speak to the people, the real people, the people who drive a bus, who clean a hotel room, because these people are the people who need the information. And besides that, I think when you were talking about access, as I come from a very poor country where there is a portion of the people who are starving. So it's not only access if it's paper or digital, but also the print are very expensive. And we even have a president who says, people don't need books. There are too many things written on the books, this president. So we don't have, we haven't built a culture, a reading culture. And on the top of that, we have now a political moment. So I think books, they are, in my context, talking about Brazilian society, it's so far away from to really to play this important role, unfortunately. But if I compare with my children who are raised here in Switzerland, where there are places where you can lend books, books are not expensive. So if I compare with where I come from, it's another world.
Thank you so much. Yes, Jessica, you have any question? Jennifer wants to say something.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that books in general, both paper books as well as other supports, still have a huge role to play in the future of humankind. We should never forget that. Books have lived with us for at least 21 centuries, and they should continue living with us for at least another 21 centuries more. We have another question that I would like the four speakers, the four authors today to answer. And I think this is a practical question. So to all the people who are listening, grab a pen, grab a piece of paper, because we're going to ask for details. Are you ready? Okay, so the question says, in humanology, you know, this discipline that we developed to study and explain human beings. In humanology, we say that no action can be taken properly without first knowing and understanding who we are. So we first have to know who we are to then act. That seems quite basic, but it's one of our fundamentals. So we would then say that no growth and change can actually happen without knowing who we are. Which books, we're asking the authors their personal books now, okay? Which books helped you in this process? Which are the books that helped you grow and change? Dun, 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 who's gonna go first? Let's see, Darren, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I think I'll just go with the easy one is the Harry Potter series for my whole family was really integral, and it's I mean, I know a lot of people think it's a children's series, right? Like it came out of the UK. it was really defining for our family, because not only did it give our children language and they could identify with who they were and their situations, but as my wife and I went through the books with them, we started to see some of the things in those books and happening with the characters that we could identify with, or that were just useful for us. And I find that I gravitate, even I mentioned before, like we even use movies and TV shows to show parents how to help their kids with this idea of bibliotherapy. I find that I gravitate toward stories where the characters are messy, in that there's not specific good, there's not a specific evil, or where they're having to mix and interweave in that. And even with the Harry Potter series, yes, there is a good, there is an evil that you definitely see, but within there's some smaller characters in there where there's one of the professors that the whole time you're thinking that he's this evil person, and then you get to the end several books later, you're getting to the end going, no, through the whole series he was trying to do this like very noble thing and protect the main character. And there's another smaller student in there where he's having to deal with issues of his parent. You find out a lot of his actions and his ideology and different things are going to the fact that his parents are in an insane asylum, and he has to go visit his parents in a psychiatric hospital and deal with that. And so I guess what I'm saying is you're able to go and you're able to peel back a lot of layers of these characters, and they're not 2D. Just like I'm not 2D, just like none of us are 2D. We have several layers to our personalities. And it's in that I find just hope, and I find just more enriching truth about myself, because I can say, yeah, I feel like this guy or this gal or whoever, but that doesn't mean I'm bad. Like, because they're not a bad character. There's not a good, there's not a bad. They're just going through stuff. And this is how they get from point A to point B. And I would like to be there. So maybe I could try that and I could do some of those things. But I think that's things that go along those lines are what I enjoy the most, is where there's not just an identified good or evil all the time. It's more of a process, and it's more of a growing process that we see going through.
Thanks a lot, Darren. Well, I hope you all took notes. And now, Liliana, what are your recommendations? Which ones made you grow and change?
So today, I think I'm always going to the past. I'm not recommend anything, but I'm going to talk about what I think the author and his novels. I think he has such a responsibility in transforming who I am and who I was in the context where I was living. So as I said before, I am a girl from Rio, but not from the rich part of the city, from the poor part of the city, where normally the tourists don't go. It's not a slum, but it's a poor neighborhood. So not Copacabana, Ipanema, the images that you see all over the world. So saying that a low middle class girl living in the suburb of the city, I was reading in the 80s, when I was a child, adolescent, I was reading Sidney Sheldon and his novels. And I have to tell you why it transformed me, because he showed me the world with his novels like The Other Side of the Midnight, Stranger in the Mirror, The Naked Face. I could travel to countries where I never imagined, like stories in Spain or in Greece, in France. He took me to these places, and I at that time I have never even taken a flight. So it was such a world for me, and I decided at that time, with 12, I don't know, 10 years old, 16, because I was reading all his novels every time I had access. And I was like, one day I will travel this world and I will learn so much about other cultures. And you see, the world brought me to this. So I think he really shaped my wish, my desire to know other cultures and people. So, and here I am.
I fully understand that, Liliana, because I was an avid reader ever since I was a little kid, and I've already lived in 8 countries. I think it's contagious. Paul, what would you say were the books that most shaped you into the change and growth that you experienced?
Well, certainly the most influential book that I've read, and I reread it probably every 3 years, is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I'm going to script his name, so I bless surname, so I won't pronounce it. But
Paulo Coelho, sorry.
Paulo Coelho, brilliant. Thank you, beautifully said. It's just an extraordinary. It's just such a gem of a book. It's like Liliana was saying, the importance of simplicity and the importance of being able to identify in and just the nuggets of kernels of information. And I read it. I think I read it when I was moving to Europe the first time on the plane, and then, like I said, every 3 years I reread the book because it's just such an extraordinary gem that has so much information in it. So that by far is the book that it holds a very near and dear place in my heart, and one that I return to about every 3 years. I reread it.
So there you go, listeners, watchers. You can go for The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho, if I say it right. Jennifer, give us your tips.
So I'm going to go a slightly different direction here, if that's okay. I think there's a poem that Pablo Neruda wrote about the moment that poetry found him. Not that he was looking for it, but that it found him. And so I want to share my moment when poetry found me, not so much as a writer, but as a reader. And I was 15 years old. I was in my sophomore year of high school, beginning of my sophomore year. And we went on a 5-day wilderness survival trip. We went up to the top of Mount Evans, which is the highest or second highest peak here in Colorado. And on the first day, we did a lot of hiking, and we reached a little glen for lunch, and we stopped and unpacked our lunches and sat in this beautiful little, shady green spot by a river. And at the end of the meal, my advisor at the time, who was an Irish Catholic from the Bronx, suddenly started reciting the work of William Butler Yeats. And for me, this particular moment and this particular poem was my poetry found me moment. It was the moment that I realized that an author could use language and elicit an emotional reaction and make people feel something. And if you're willing to give me the time, I'd love to read it. It's only 3 stanzas. Is that okay? Could I read the piece? All right. So this is a poem. It's still my all-time favorite. I probably pull this out every couple of months and read it again. I used to recite it from memory for my students every semester. So it's called The Song of Wandering Angus. And I agree that it's how you read it too, right? So I'm going to do my best teacher poetry voice here. I went out to the hazelwood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun.
Wow. I think that was very impressive and inspiring. Thank
And
you.
that's, I'm kind of giving my time to Yates, right? So I'll close with his words.
Okay, so everybody, we're going a little tight on time now because we want to finish a little early. We want to make this really compact, filled with information and excitement, but we do have another question and a few comments that we would like to share with you. People have been busy writing comments on our social media, and I would like to share some of those comments with our experts. Malmina says, this is so spot on. I've never heard someone give a step-by-step thought process to follow like this before. I think it was referring to the presentation Paul made before. And then she adds,
yes.
And then she adds, strongly agree, literature allows us to find even the hidden qualities in ourselves by trying on different identities that bring out those hidden parts of us from the nooks and crannies of our brain. Then Robina says, a talk which is needed of the hour. Great going, Javeria, Asad. Well, these are some of the comments we're receiving, but we also got one question that I would like to share with our experts to see what their answers are. Let's see, the question says, can a person who doesn't read reach the same level of growth and change as a reader? I think we don't have that much time. I would ask all our speakers to answer briefly. Do you think a non-reader can grow and change as much as a reader? Jennifer, would you like to start?
Yeah, I want to jump in with a very practical answer first, which is very simply that the development of the brain requires the 2 pages of the physical printed text, right? So it's not just, and I agree with what Dr. Paul was saying before too about the fact that we're moving toward a new form of reading, but we know from brain research that young people, when they're developing, need the coordination of the left and right brain, which actually happens when we look at 2 sides of a page, whether we're aware of it or not, right? So on a basic level, I think our growth will be slowed down. On a bigger picture level, I think it's kind of like growing up inside a little tiny, room with blinders on, not becoming aware of what's beyond the walls that you grew up with. I think it's a disadvantage if you're not a reader. I certainly think you can grow in other ways, but on that basic level, the brain really needs reading.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, so I give an unequivocal yes. So certainly you can grow and change without reading. I think that the important thing is to create a narrative, to create a consistent narrative, and so there are other ways to do that. Visually, we can create a narrative. I think the point is to be curious. I think that how we grow and change is through curiosity. And so reading enables us to fulfill that curiosity, going out into the world and looking at the world as an observer participant, gives us that opportunity. So I think the key element of, or one of the foundational aspects of growth and change is curiosity. So I would encourage everybody, and we're all curious. So cultivate curiosity, and through curiosity and intentionality, you can grow and change.
Thanks so much, Paul. Liliana, what would you say? Microphone, please. Yes.
Oh my God! I don't know if I have the knowledge to answer this question, but I would say I have seen in my life many people with such a wisdom, but they didn't even go to school. So as I'm not a specialist in that topic, I could say that, of course, I think these people were, talents who were not developed. They could have been much more. They could have served the humanity much more. But I have faced so many people with this natural wisdom. But I think with books, it could have been better. But as I'm not a specialist, so this is just an opinion.
No, and that's what we're asking you for. Thanks a lot for that answer, Liliana. Darren, what's your stand?
My stand is I need another month to think about it. Yes, it's obviously, like, people can grow with the different uses of technology and different ways to get information. Yes, you can, there can be growth happen. I think the question though specifically said, can they reach the same level of growth as a reader? That's what I want a month longer to think on and look into, because initially, like, I'm sitting here thinking as an individual, oh my gosh, I can never reach the same level as Liliana because I'm not Liliana. Like, I don't have the same talents and abilities. So I'm not going to be able, like, give me 1,000 books. I'm still not getting there. So to me, I think you have to look at the individual and where they're going to get and what they need, what they want, their identity, where they want to be, and their talent base level. As weird, I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of skirting the question, but I do feel like that has to be taken into consideration with looking at, are they going to get the same amount of growth from it?
That's funny, because that's exactly what a humanologist would have answered. Thank you for those answers. Javeria, on to you.
Wow, I was enjoying the discussion, and actually the last question covered the overall theme of our event, which was human evolution through books. I think we have covered this theme and its aspect comprehensively. And definitely what I would say about, if I want to reply in this question, definitely books are the power booster of knowledge. Even we are making a small presentation, we have to read. If for example, I have to conduct this 2-day event. So I asked Jessica, please give me some literature, because I am moderating the session. If I don't know anything about the humanology, how can I conduct this session? So I think reading is important, whether you are reading books or articles or pictorial or anything. So I think we should continue this habit, not on academic level, but also on a family level. There should be a reading family hour, actually. And after finishing my engineering, actually Read Pakistan has an important role when I refresh my reading habits. So thank you so much to all the wonderful guests today we had. Thank you, Jessica, for bringing these gems today, and amazing discussion we had. And this will, as I said yesterday also, this is the beginning of a new journey. We are not going to end here. We will have the series of events in future, and our scheduled event on every last Saturday, like we did last weekend of August. So following this pattern, on every last Saturday of the month, we are going to do one event based on different themes. Let me share the screen of our shout out, so you will guys have a proper idea what I'm going to say. Yeah, so our next event will be on 25th of September, and our theme will be Humanology and Violence Against Women, because right now we are receiving so many cases regarding this, and definitely we will invite humanologists, experts, and writers to support the theme, and we will share some ideas. And definitely after that, because it's a collaborative event of International Institute of Humanology and Read Pakistan, so we have to focus on books also. So we are going to launch our Humanology book club also. This is a great news for everybody who loves humanology or books related to the social issues, because humanology covered everything, part of coaching, career counseling, psychology, and et cetera, et cetera. So our Humanology book will be launched in October, starting from October, as I said, and every Thursday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time, and Jessica will change the time schedule with us. Jessica, you want to say something regarding this?
I just want to say that the Humanology Book Club will be like no other book club, because it's not just going to be, okay, this is one book, we're going to read it, we're going to speak about it. No, we're going to do a lot of other activities as well. We plan to invite authors and experts. We plan to offer practical humanological growth workshops that people can enroll in. We're going to organize the reading in a way that makes it easy for people to read. We are going to try and get people to set certain achievable targets so they can really get reading and they can really enjoy reading, so they grow and change through books, which was today's topic. So that will start next October. Drop us a word, a line if you want to join this book club. If you want more information, just send us a message and we'll get back to you very happily.
And it's a great to announce this shout out in front of all these authors, because definitely their books will be, part of our book club, and definitely we will invite them to explain their books reviews with everyone. So thank you so much once again on behalf of Read Pakistan and of course the International Institute of Humanology. And thank you so much, Jessica, because when I came up with this idea to you, I was totally blank. I was just just introduce Read Pakistan to the global community, but I never thought about that we will do like this. I mean, I have no words. I'm speechless. The way you conduct the thing, the way you conceive the things, it's just amazing. And I really, really like the way of working of your style, on the dot. You have to do right now. I like it. I really like it. Thank you so much for everything you have done so far for Read Pakistan, and hoping so much for in the future. Thank you so much, Jennifer, Liliana, Dr. Paul, Darren. I really, really enjoyed the overall talk we had today. And of course, I can't. How can I forget our backup support, technical support, Hamdan. Thank you so much, Hamdan.